Maria Santos wiped down the last table in Section 3 and glanced at the clock hanging above the kitchen door. 8:47 p.m. Her feet ached inside her worn white sneakers, and her lower back screamed from carrying heavy trays all day. She had started her shift at Danny's Diner at 6 a.m. that morning, covering for another waitress who called in sick. Again. The diner buzzed with its usual evening crowd. Truck drivers stopped for coffee and pie on their long hauls. Local families grabbed quick dinners after soccer practice and dance classes. College students hunched over textbooks while nursing cups of coffee they couldn't really afford to refill. Maria knew them all by name and order. She had been working at this place for almost 3 years now, and these people had become like family to her. "Maria, table 6 needs more coffee," called out Frank Rodriguez, the manager, from behind the counter. Frank was a good man who understood that his employees worked hard for every dollar. He never complained when Maria picked up extra shifts, and he always made sure she got the better tip-earning sections during busy times. Maria grabbed the coffee pot and walked over to table 6, where Mr. Peterson sat reading his newspaper like he did every Tuesday. He was a retired teacher who lived alone and came to the diner for company more than food. "How's that coffee treating you tonight, Mr. Peterson?" she asked with a genuine smile. "Just fine, sweetheart." "How's your brother doing? Last time you mentioned he had another doctor's appointment coming up." Maria's smile wavered slightly, but she kept her voice steady. "He's hanging in there. You know how it is with diabetes. Some days are better than others." What she didn't tell Mr. Peterson was that Luis needed insulin that cost more than she made in a week, and their insurance barely covered half of it. 22-year-old Luis was the reason Maria dropped out of nursing school 2 years ago. When their parents died in a car accident 5 years back, Maria became his guardian. She was only 23, then, working part-time at a clinic while studying to become a registered nurse. But when Luis got diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, everything changed. The medical bills piled up faster than she could count, and someone had to make sure he took his medications on time and ate proper meals. So Maria made the hardest decision of her life. She left school, picked up full-time work at the diner, and took on weekend shifts at a grocery store across town. Her dreams of helping people in a hospital would have to wait. Right now, her brother needed her more than anything else. The bell above the front door chimed, and Maria looked up to see a man she had never seen before walking into the diner. He was probably in his early 70s, with silver hair combed, neatly back and wearing a dark blue suit that looked like it cost more than Maria made in 6 months. His shoes were polished leather, and his watch caught the light from the overhead lamps. But what struck Maria most was how tired he looked. His shoulders sagged like he was carrying the weight of the world, and his eyes had a distant, worried expression. He stood in the doorway for a moment, looking around the diner as if he wasn't sure he belonged there. Maria grabbed a menu and walked over to him. "Good evening, sir. Just one tonight?" He nodded and followed her to a corner booth near the window. The booth gave him a clear view of the entire diner, but also offered some privacy from the other customers. He slid into the seat and placed his hands flat on the table. "Can I start you off with something to drink?" Maria asked, setting the menu down in front of him. "Black coffee, please. No sugar, no cream." His voice was deep but quiet, like someone who was used to giving orders but tonight just wanted to disappear. "I'll be right back with that." As Maria walked to the coffee station, she noticed the man wasn't looking at the menu. Instead, he was staring out the window at the parking lot, but his eyes seemed focused on something much farther away. His phone sat on the table next to him, and every few seconds he would glance at it like he was expecting an important call. She returned with his coffee and pulled out her order pad. "Have you decided on anything to eat, or do you need a few more minutes?" "Apple pie," he said without looking at the menu. "If you have it." "We do. Frank makes the best apple pie in 3 counties. Would you like ice cream with that?" For the first time since he walked in, the man looked directly at her. His eyes were gray-blue, and Maria could see years of experience in them, but tonight they also held something else. Pain, maybe. Or fear. No ice cream. Just the pie. Maria wrote down his order and headed to the kitchen. As she clipped the order to the wheel for Pete, the cook, she found herself glancing back at the man in the corner booth. Something about him seemed familiar, though she was certain she had never served him before. Maybe it was the way he held himself, like someone important trying very hard not to be noticed. "Who's the fancy guy in the corner?" Pete asked, sliding a plate of apple pie across the pass-through window. "Never seen him before, but he looks like he's having the worst day of his life." Maria delivered the pie and refilled his coffee cup. The man thanked her politely but didn't try to make conversation. He ate slowly, cutting small pieces of pie and chewing thoughtfully. Every few minutes he would check his phone, and each time he did, his expression grew more worried. What Maria didn't know was that the man sitting in her section was Richard Blackstone, founder and CEO of Blackstone Technologies. His company had revolutionized data security, making him one of the wealthiest people in the country. He owned houses in 5 different states, a private jet, and more money than most people could spend in 10 lifetimes. But tonight, none of that mattered. 3 hours ago, Richard had received a phone call that changed everything. His son, David, who he hadn't spoken to in 2 years after a bitter argument about the family business, had been in a serious car accident. David was in surgery at a hospital, 2 states away, and the doctors weren't sure if he would make it through the night. Richard had been driving toward the hospital when he realized he needed to stop. His hands were shaking too badly to keep driving safely, and his mind was racing with thoughts of all the things he should have said to his son, all the phone calls he should have made, all the time he had wasted being stubborn and proud. So he pulled off the highway and found this little diner, thinking he would grab a quick coffee and get back on the road. But sitting here, watching the normal life of regular people going on around him, somehow made him feel a little less alone with his fear. He watched Maria move between her tables, chatting with customers like they were old friends. She laughed at an elderly woman's joke and patiently helped a young father clean up the mess his toddler had made with a bowl of ice cream. There was something genuine about her smile, something real that Richard hadn't seen in years of dealing with business, partners, and board meetings. Most people who served Richard knew exactly who he was. They treated him differently, carefully, hoping to impress him or get something from him. But this young woman just saw a customer who needed coffee and pie and maybe a kind word. For the first time in months, Richard felt like a regular person, instead of a walking bank account. He took another sip of coffee and checked his phone again. Still no update from the hospital. The waiting was killing him. But somehow, sitting in this warm, busy diner made it a little more bearable. He decided he would finish his pie, leave a good tip for the hard-working waitress, and then continue his drive to what might be the most important conversation of his life. Maria was balancing 3 plates on her left arm when she heard the coffee pot start gurgling on the warmer. The dinner rush was finally slowing down, and she was looking forward to taking a proper break for the first time in 6 hours. Her legs felt like jelly, but she pushed through the tiredness. Just 2 more hours until closing time. She walked over to the corner booth where the well-dressed man sat, still picking at his apple pie. He had been there for almost an hour now, checking his phone every few minutes. Maria had refilled his coffee 3 times, and each time she noticed he looked more worried than before. "How's everything tasting tonight?" she asked, lifting the coffee pot. "Fine, thank you." He looked up at her briefly. "You've been very kind." Something in his voice made Maria pause. He sounded like a man trying to hold himself together. She had heard that tone before, in the hospital waiting rooms when she sat with Luis during his worst episodes. "Is there anything else I can get you? Maybe some fresh pie?" Pete just pulled a cherry pie out of the oven. The man shook his head. "This is perfect. You have good instincts about people." Maria wasn't sure what he meant by that, but she smiled. "Anyway. Well, if you need anything, just wave me down." She was heading back to the kitchen when the front door burst open with such force that it slammed against the wall. Everyone in the diner turned to look as a woman stumbled inside, carrying a small boy in her arms. The child's head was lolling to one side, and even from across the room, Maria could see something was terribly wrong. "Help!" the woman screamed. "Please, somebody help me. My son won't wake up." The woman was Asian, probably in her 30s, wearing scrubs like she worked at a hospital or clinic. Her dark hair was pulled. back in a messy ponytail, and tears were streaming down her face. The boy in her arms looked to be about 8 years old, with black hair and wearing a baseball uniform. His lips had a bluish tint that made Maria's stomach drop. He just collapsed. The woman cried, looking around desperately. We were walking to the car after his game, and he said he couldn't breathe. Then he fell down and won't wake up. The other customers in the diner sat frozen, staring at the scene. Someone near the door pulled out their phone, probably calling 911. But Maria was already moving, her 3 years of pre-nursing classes kicking in like muscle memory. She recognized those symptoms immediately. The blue lips, the unconscious state, the sudden collapse. Luis had looked exactly the same way during his first severe allergic reaction 2 years ago. They had been at a restaurant when he accidentally ate something with peanuts in it. Maria would never forget the terror of watching her brother's face turn blue as his throat closed up. Bring him over here, Maria called out, pointing to the large booth near the kitchen. She swept the plates and glasses off the table with one arm, not caring about the crash they made hitting the floor. The woman rushed over and laid her son on the booth bench. Up close, Maria could see the child's breathing was shallow and labored. His chest was barely moving, and there were red blotches spreading across his neck and face. What's his name? Maria asked, kneeling beside the booth. Tommy. His name is Tommy Chen. The woman's voice was shaking. Please, you have to help him. He's all I have. Maria looked at Tommy's face and saw her brother Luis. She saw every child she had ever wanted to help when she was studying to become a nurse. This was exactly why she had wanted to work in healthcare, to be there when people needed help the most. Does he have any allergies? Maria asked quickly. Shellfish. He's allergic to shellfish, but we didn't eat anything today except hot dogs at the game. Sometimes foods get cross-contaminated, Maria said, already reaching for her purse. Did you eat anywhere after the game? We stopped at a food truck. He had chicken tacos. Mrs. Chen was crying harder now. Oh God, they must have used the same oil or something. Maria's hands were steady as she opened her purse and pulled out the small orange and blue device she carried everywhere. She had bought the EpiPen after Luis's first reaction, and she always kept it with her just in case. Her brother's doctor had taught her how to use it, and she had practiced the motion dozens of times. I'm going to give him an injection, Maria told Mrs. Chen. It's epinephrine, it should help his breathing. She didn't wait for permission. Tommy's lips were getting bluer by the second, and she knew they didn't have time to wait for paramedics. She pulled the blue cap off the EpiPen and positioned it against Tommy's thigh, right through his baseball pants. Hold him still, she told. Mrs. Chen Maria pressed the orange tip firmly against Tommy's leg and held it there for 10 seconds, just like she had been taught. She heard the click as the needle deployed, delivering the life-saving medication into the child's system. For a moment, nothing happened. The diner was completely silent, except for Mrs. Chen's quiet sobbing and the sound of Tommy's labored breathing. Maria kept her hand on his wrist, feeling for his pulse. It was there, but fast and weak. Then slowly, Tommy's breathing started to improve. The blue color began fading from his lips, and his chest started rising and falling more normally. Maria felt tears of relief spring to her eyes. Come on, Tommy, she whispered. Come back to us. The boy's eyelids fluttered and he made a small sound. Mrs. Chen gasped and grabbed his hand. Tommy? Sweetheart, can you hear me? Tommy's eyes opened slightly, and he looked confused. Mom? His voice was hoarse and weak, but it was the most beautiful sound Maria had ever heard. Oh, thank God, Mrs. Chen sobbed, kissing her son's forehead. You scared me so much. Maria knew they weren't out of danger yet. We need to get him to a hospital right away, she said. The epinephrine will help for now, but he needs proper medical care. Sometimes people have secondary reactions. Just then, they heard sirens approaching. Someone had called 911, and the paramedics were almost there. Maria stayed with Tommy, monitoring his breathing and pulse while they waited. She could hear Frank talking to the emergency responders on the phone, giving them directions to the diner. Throughout all of this, Maria was completely unaware that Richard Blackstone was watching every move she made. He had seen her drop everything to help a stranger's child. He had watched her use her own medical supplies without hesitation. He had witnessed her take charge of a life-or-death situation with the kind of calm competence that couldn't be taught. What impressed him most was that she never asked who would pay for the EpiPen she had just used. She never asked if the family had insurance or whether they could afford an ambulance. She just saw a child who needed help, and she helped him. Richard thought about his own son, David, lying in a hospital bed 2 states away. He wondered if there had been someone like Maria there when David needed help, someone who cared more about saving a life than about paperwork or payment. The paramedics rushed in just as Tommy was starting to sit up. Maria quickly explained what had happened and what medication she had given him. The lead paramedic, a woman about Maria's age, looked impressed. "You probably saved his life," she told Maria. "Anaphylactic shock can be fatal in minutes. You did exactly the right thing." As they loaded Tommy onto a stretcher, Mrs. Chen grabbed Maria's hands. "I don't know how to thank you. You saved my baby." "Just take care of him," Maria said softly. "And make sure he carries his own EpiPen from now on." Mrs. Chen nodded tearfully and followed the paramedics out to the ambulance. The diner slowly returned to normal, with Frank and Pete cleaning up the broken dishes while the remaining customers talked quietly about what they had just witnessed. Maria sat down heavily in the nearest chair, her hands finally starting to shake as the adrenaline wore off. She had just saved a child's life with the medication she carried for her brother. It felt like everything she had learned in nursing school, all those dreams she had put on hold, had led to this moment. The ambulance sirens faded into the distance, and the diner slowly returned to its normal evening rhythm. Maria sat at the counter, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that Frank had poured for her without being asked. Her uniform was stained with spilled coffee from when she had cleared the table so quickly, and her heart was still beating faster than usual. "You did good, kid," Frank said quietly, wiping down glasses behind the counter. "Real good. That boy's mom looked like she was about to lose her mind." Maria nodded but didn't say anything. She was thinking about Tommy's blue lips and how scared Mrs. Chen had looked. It reminded her too much of the night Luis had his first reaction. The helpless feeling of watching someone you care about struggle to breathe. The panic that takes over when you realize how quickly everything can change. "You okay?" Pete called from the kitchen window. "You look a little pale." "I'm fine," Maria said, though her voice sounded shaky even to her own ears. "Just need a minute." She looked around the diner and noticed that most of the customers were still talking about what had happened. The elderly couple in booth 2 kept glancing over at her with amazed expressions. The college student near the window had put down her textbook and was staring at Maria like she was some kind of hero. But the man in the corner booth was watching her differently. While everyone else seemed excited or impressed, he looked thoughtful, like he was studying her, trying to figure something out. When their eyes met, he didn't look away like most people would. Instead, he gave her a small nod, almost like he was acknowledging something. Maria finished her coffee and got back to work. She still had tables to clear and customers to serve. The last thing she needed was for Frank to think she couldn't handle her job because of one emergency. She grabbed her order pad and walked over to table 4, where a young father was trying to convince his 5-year-old daughter to eat her vegetables. "How's everything tasting tonight?" she asked with a smile that felt more natural now. "Great, thanks. Hey, that was really something you did for that kid," the father said. "You're like a real-life superhero or something." Maria felt her cheeks get warm. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," the man said seriously. "Most people would have just called 911 and waited. You actually knew what to do. That takes training." After taking their dessert order, Maria headed back toward the kitchen. As she passed the corner booth, the well-dressed man raised his hand slightly to get her attention. "Excuse me, miss?" Maria stopped and walked over to his table. "Yes, sir. Do you need anything else?" "I wanted to ask you something if you don't mind." His voice was calm and measured, like someone used to asking important questions. "How long have you been working here?" It was an odd question, but Maria answered anyway. "Almost 3 years. 3 years next month, actually." "And before that?" Maria hesitated. She wasn't sure why this stranger was asking about her background, but something about his manner made her want to answer honestly. I was in school. Nursing. School. The man nodded slowly. What made you leave? Now Maria really didn't understand why he was asking, but she found herself answering anyway. Family reasons. My brother got sick and I needed to work full-time to help with his medical bills. That must have been difficult, giving up your dream to take care of family. Maria felt a lump forming in her throat. She hadn't talked to anyone about her nursing school dreams in months. Most people just saw her as a waitress and never thought to ask about anything else. It wasn't really a choice, she said quietly. Family comes first. The man studied her face for a long moment. The way you handled that emergency tonight. That wasn't something you learned working in a restaurant. My brother has severe allergies. I've had to use an EpiPen before. Maria shifted uncomfortably. This conversation was getting too personal with a complete stranger. Is there anything else I can get you tonight? Actually, yes. Could you tell me your full name? Maria blinked, in surprise. I'm sorry, what? Your name. I'd like to know your full name. Every warning bell in Maria's head started going off. This was exactly the kind of thing her mother had warned her about when she started working in restaurants. Strange men asking personal questions. She took a step back from the table. I don't think that's appropriate, sir. If you need anything else for your meal, I'll be happy to help. Otherwise, I should get back to my other tables. The man held up his hands in a peaceful gesture. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. Let me explain why I'm asking. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. He set it on the table and slid it toward Maria. My name is Richard Blackstone. I own a company called Blackstone Technologies. Maria picked up the card and read it. The name didn't mean anything to her, but the card was clearly expensive. Heavy paper, embossed lettering, and a logo that looked professionally designed. I'm not sure what that has to do with anything, she said. What I saw you do tonight was extraordinary. You didn't hesitate. You didn't worry about liability or whether someone else should handle it. You just saw a child who needed help and you helped him. That tells me something important about who you are as a person. Maria was getting more confused by the minute. I still don't understand why you want to know my name. Richard looked out the window toward the parking lot, then back at Maria. I've been having the worst day of my life. I got some terrible news about my family and I stopped here because I needed to collect myself before continuing my drive. I was sitting here feeling sorry for myself, thinking about how cold and selfish the world has become. He gestured toward the spot where Tommy had been lying just an hour earlier. Then I watched you risk your own medication, your own supplies to save a complete stranger's child. You didn't ask if they could pay you back for the EpiPen. You didn't worry about whether you might get in trouble for practicing medicine without a license. You just acted. Maria felt tears starting to form in her eyes, though she wasn't sure why. Anyone would have done the same thing. No, Richard said firmly. They wouldn't have. Most people would have stood there waiting for someone else to take charge. But you have something special. You have the instinct to help others, and you have the knowledge to do it effectively. He pulled out his wallet and placed a $50 bill on the table next to his $8 check. My name is Maria Santos, she said quietly, and I really don't understand what any of this has to do with you. It has everything to do with me, Maria Santos. More than you know. Richard stood up from the booth and put on his coat. I need to leave now. I have somewhere very important to be. But I want you to know that watching you tonight reminded me that there are still genuinely good people in this world. He picked up his phone and business card, leaving the money on the table. Someone will be in touch with you soon, don't worry, nothing bad. Just someone who wants to ask you a few questions about your goals and dreams. Maria stared at him in confusion. I don't understand. You will, Richard said. Sooner than you think. He walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. Maria, can I ask you one more question? I guess. If money wasn't an issue, if you could do anything you wanted with your life, what would it be? Maria didn't even have to think about it. I'd go back to nursing school. I'd become a registered nurse and work in pediatrics. I want to help sick children get better. Richard smiled for the first time since he had walked into the diner. That's exactly what I thought you'd say. With that, he walked out the door, leaving Maria standing by his table with more questions than answers. She picked up the $50 bill and stared at it. This was more than she usually made in tips for an entire shift. Frank walked over and looked at the money. Generous guy, what did he want to talk about? I have no idea, Maria said honestly, but I think something just changed, and I don't know if that's good or bad. She put the money in her apron pocket and started clearing the table, but her mind was racing. Richard Blackstone. She would have to look up his company when she got home. Something told her this wasn't the last she would hear from the mysterious man in the expensive suit. Outside in the parking lot, Richard sat in his car for a moment before starting the engine. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in over a year. Jackson, it's Richard. I need you to do something for me. Tonight. I need you to find out everything you can about a woman named Maria Santos. She works at Danny's Diner outside of Millfield. And Jackson? This is important. More important than any background check I've ever asked for. As he hung up and started driving toward the hospital where his son was fighting for his life, Richard couldn't stop thinking about Maria's answer to his last question. She wanted to help sick children, just like David had wanted to help people when he was young, before money and business got in the way of their relationship. Maybe it wasn't too late to remember what really mattered. Maybe Maria Santos had just reminded him of something he had forgotten a long time ago. 2 weeks passed after the incident at Danny's Diner, and Maria had almost forgotten about the mysterious man in the expensive suit. Almost. She still had his business card tucked in her wallet. But when she had looked up Blackstone Technologies online, the website was filled with technical information she didn't understand. The company seemed to deal with computer security and data protection, which meant nothing to her daily life of serving coffee and clearing tables. What she couldn't forget was the $50 tip. That money had helped her buy Luis an extra week's worth of test strips for his blood sugar monitor. Small miracles like that didn't happen often in Maria's world, so she remembered them. It was a Thursday morning when the first strange thing happened. Maria was getting ready for her early shift when her phone rang. She didn't recognize the number but answered anyway in case it was someone calling about a shift change. Is this Maria Santos? The voice was professional, businesslike. Yes, this is Maria. Who's calling? This is Jennifer Walsh from Millfield General Hospital Billing Department. I'm calling about your brother, Luis Santos. Maria's stomach dropped. Luis had been to the emergency room 3 months ago when his blood sugar spiked dangerously high. They still owed over $2,000 from that visit, and Maria had been making small payments whenever she could afford it. Look, I know we're behind on the payments, Maria said quickly, but I can send you $50 this week and maybe more next month if I pick up extra shifts. Actually, Miss Santos, I'm calling because there seems to be some confusion in our records. Your brother's account shows a zero balance as of yesterday. Maria sat down hard on her bed. What do you mean, zero balance? Someone paid the full amount owed. The payment came through as a cashier's check from First National Bank. We wanted to confirm that this was legitimate before we processed it. I don't understand. Who paid it? The payment slip says it's from an anonymous benefactor. There's no name attached to the payment, just a note that says medical expenses for Luis Santos paid in full. Maria stared at her phone, trying to make sense of what she was hearing. Are you sure you have the right account? Luis Santos, date of birth March 15, 2003. Emergency room visit on June 22nd for diabetic ketoacidosis. That was definitely Luis. But Maria had no idea who would pay his medical bills. They didn't have any wealthy relatives, and she hadn't told anyone at work about their money problems except Frank, and Frank was struggling to pay his own bills. Miss Santos, are you still there? Yes, I'm here. Are you sure this is real? The check cleared yesterday. Your brother's account is completely paid up. You don't need to make any more payments. After she hung up, Maria sat in her tiny bedroom trying to figure out what had just happened. $2,000 didn't just appear out of nowhere. Someone had to have paid it, but who? And why? She was still thinking about it when she got to work that afternoon. Frank was behind the counter. going through invoices and looking stressed, like he always did when paying bills. "You look confused about something," he said when he saw her expression. "Someone paid Luis's hospital bill, the whole thing, anonymously." Frank looked up from his paperwork. "Seriously? That's amazing. Who do you think it was?" "I have no idea. We don't know anyone with that kind of money. Maybe it was someone from your church?" Maria shook her head. "The people at St. Michael's are good people, but they're all working families just like us. Nobody there has $2,000 to give away." She tried to put it out of her mind and focus on work, but the mystery bothered her all day. When she got home that evening, she found Luis sitting at their kitchen table with his laptop open and a huge grin on his face. "Maria, you're not going to believe this," he said before she even had her coat off. "What now? Remember how I applied for that scholarship to community college? The one where I wrote that essay about living with diabetes? Yeah, you said they probably had hundreds of applicants. I got it. I got the full scholarship, tuition, books, everything." Luis held up a letter from the college. "They called me this afternoon. I start classes next month." Maria felt her knees go weak. First the hospital bill, now this. Luis had applied for dozens of scholarships over the past year and been rejected for all of them. His grades were good, but not outstanding, and there were always students with better test scores or more impressive activities. "Luis, that's incredible, but are you sure it's real?" "I called the school. It's real. The scholarship is called the Future Healthcare Workers Fund, and it's for students who want to work in medical fields. The lady I talked to said my essay about wanting to help other kids with diabetes really impressed the selection committee." Maria hugged her brother tightly, but part of her mind was racing. 2 mysterious payments in one day seemed like too much of a coincidence. That weekend, Maria decided to do something she had been putting off for months. She walked down to the community college admissions office to ask about their nursing program. She had been thinking about it ever since Richard Blackstone asked her about her dreams. Maybe there was a way to go back to school part-time while still working. The woman at the admissions desk was friendly and helpful. She pulled up information about the nursing program and explained the requirements. Maria was taking notes when the woman's computer made a beeping sound. "Oh, that's interesting," the woman said, looking at her screen. "What is it?" "It looks like there's a note in the system about you. Let me see." She clicked through a few screens. "It says here that you've been pre-approved for a special scholarship program, the Second Chance Healthcare Education Fund. Have you applied for this?" Maria felt that same dizzy feeling she'd had when the hospital called. "No, I haven't applied for anything." "What kind of scholarship is it?" "It covers full tuition, books, and even provides a monthly stipend for living expenses while you're in school. It's specifically for people who had to leave healthcare programs due to family circumstances." The woman looked confused. "But there's no record of you submitting an application. This is very unusual." "Who sponsors the scholarship?" "It says here the funding comes from an anonymous donor. The money goes through the college foundation, but we don't have information about who provides it." Maria left the admissions office with more questions than answers. 3 anonymous payments in 3 days. Someone was helping her family, but she had no idea who or why. That evening, she called the one person she could think of who might have some answers. She found Richard Blackstone's business card and dialed the number. "Blackstone Technologies. This is Amanda speaking. Hi, I'm trying to reach Richard Blackstone. My name is Maria Santos." There was a pause. "One moment, please, Miss Santos." The woman put her on hold, and Maria was starting to think she had made a mistake when a familiar voice came on the line. "Maria, I was wondering when you might call." "Mr. Blackstone, I need to ask you something." "I think I know what you're going to ask. Did you pay my brother's hospital bill?" Another pause. "What makes you think that?" "Because strange things have been happening ever since I met you. Bills getting paid, scholarships appearing out of nowhere. Either you're involved, or meeting you was the luckiest coincidence of my life." Richard chuckled softly. "You're very direct, I appreciate that." "So it was you?" "Let's just say that I believe in helping good people when I can. You saved a child's life, Maria. You used your own medical supplies and your own knowledge. to help a complete stranger. That kind of character is rare. But why? You don't even know me. I know enough. I know you dropped out of nursing school to take care of your brother. I know you work 2 jobs to pay for his medications. I know you volunteer at the children's hospital on your days off, even though you're exhausted from working so much. Maria was quiet for a moment. How do you know all that? I had someone look into your background. I hope you don't mind. I needed to be sure you were the person I thought you were. What kind of person did you think I was? The kind of person who deserves a chance to follow her dreams. The kind of person who would use that chance to help others, not just herself. Maria felt tears starting to form. Mr. Blackstone, I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything. But I do want to meet with you again. There's something else I'd like to discuss. What kind of something? The kind of something that could change your life. If you're interested. Maria looked around her tiny apartment, at the stack of bills on the counter and the medical supplies scattered across the kitchen table. Then she thought about Tommy Chen, and how good it had felt to help him. I'm interested, she said. 3 weeks after their phone conversation, Richard Blackstone walked back into Danny's diner during Maria's evening shift. This time he looked completely different. The worried, tired expression was gone, replaced by something Maria couldn't quite identify. He looked peaceful, maybe even hopeful. Maria was wiping down tables when she saw him come through the door. Her heart started beating faster, and she realized she had been both dreading and looking forward to this moment ever since their phone call. She had so many questions, but she was also nervous about what he might want from her in return for his help. Table for one, she asked, walking over with a menu. Actually, I was hoping we could talk privately. Do you have a break coming up soon? Maria glanced at the clock. It was almost 9 and the dinner crowd had thinned out. Frank was behind the counter, and Pete was cleaning the kitchen. She could probably take 15 minutes. Let me check with my manager. Frank nodded when she asked, probably because business was slow and he had seen Richard leave that huge tip weeks ago. Take your time, kid. Just don't leave the building. Maria grabbed her coat and followed Richard outside to the parking lot. The evening air was cool, and she could hear traffic from the highway in the distance. They sat on the bench outside the diner's front entrance, under the yellow light from the street lamp. First, I want to thank you, Richard said. For what you did that night and for giving me a chance to help your family. Mr. Blackstone, I still don't understand why you did all those things for us. The hospital bill, Luis's scholarship, my college money. We're complete strangers. Richard was quiet for a moment, looking out at the parking lot. Do you remember how I looked when I first came into the diner that night? You looked upset about something, worried. I had just gotten the worst phone call of my life. My son David was in a car accident. He was in surgery, and the doctors weren't sure he was going to make it. Maria felt her stomach drop. Oh my God, is he okay? He's alive. He spent 2 weeks in the hospital, but he's going to be fine. We had a lot of time to talk while he was recovering. Richard's voice got softer. David and I hadn't spoken in over 2 years before that accident. We had a terrible fight about the family business, about money, about what was important in life. I thought he was being ungrateful, and he thought I cared more about profit than people. That must have been awful. It was. And sitting in that hospital, I realized he was right about a lot of things. I had become so focused on making money that I forgot why money matters in the first place. It's supposed to help people live better lives, not just pile up in bank accounts. Maria nodded, thinking about how many times she had wished for just a little more money to help Luis, or to go back to school, or to not worry about next month's rent. That night in the diner, I was driving to the hospital, and I had to stop because my hands were shaking too badly to keep driving. I was terrified I was going to lose my son before I could tell him I was sorry. Richard turned to look directly at Maria. Then I watched you save Tommy Chen's life. You didn't hesitate for even a second. You saw a child who needed help, and you helped him, even though it meant using your own medication and risking your own resources. You reminded me of the kind of person I used to be, before I got caught up in business deals and board meetings. Anyone would have done the same thing. No, Maria, they wouldn't have. Most people would have called 911 and waited. But you had the knowledge and the courage to act. That's special. Maria felt tears starting to form. I just did what felt right. Exactly. And that's why I wanted to help you. Not because I felt sorry for you, but because I believe people like you should have every opportunity to follow their dreams. The world needs more nurses like you're going to be. Richard reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. I have something I want to discuss with you. It's bigger than scholarships or paid bills. Maria took the folder and opened it. Inside were documents that looked official and important, with letterheads and signatures she didn't recognize. What is this? It's the paperwork to establish a foundation, the Santos Emergency Response Foundation. It would be dedicated to training people in emergency medical response and providing scholarships for healthcare workers from underprivileged backgrounds. Maria stared at the papers, trying to understand what she was reading. I don't understand. What does this have to do with me? You would run it. After you finish nursing school, of course. The foundation would be yours to operate however you think would help the most people. Mr. Blackstone, I can't run a foundation. I'm just a waitress who wants to be a nurse. You're a person who saved a child's life with quick thinking and medical knowledge. You're someone who sacrificed her own dreams to take care of her family. You're exactly the kind of person who should be running a foundation like this. Maria looked through the papers again. There were budget projections, program descriptions, and plans for training centers. The numbers were bigger than anything she had ever imagined. How much money are we talking about here? Initial funding would be $5 million. That's enough to establish training programs in 10 different cities and provide full scholarships for 50 students each year. Maria felt dizzy. $5 million was more money than she could even picture. Why would you trust me with that much money? Because 3 weeks ago, you trusted a stranger's child with your own medication. Because you worked 2 jobs to pay for your brother's medical care. Because when I asked you what you would do if money wasn't an issue, you said you wanted to help sick children. Richard leaned forward on the bench. Maria, I've built a successful company, but I've never done anything as important as what you did that night. You saved Tommy's life, but you also saved mine. You reminded me that there are still genuinely good people in the world. What about your son? How does he feel about this? Richard smiled for the first time since they had sat down. David loves the idea. In fact, he wants to work with the foundation. He's been studying social work, and he thinks this could be his chance to make a real difference instead of just making money. Maria was quiet for a long time, looking at the papers in her lap. She thought about all the times she had wished she could do more to help people. All the children she had seen in the hospital when visiting Luis. All the families struggling with medical bills and insurance problems. If I said yes, what would happen next? First, you finish nursing school. The foundation will pay for everything, including a living allowance so you don't have to work while you're studying. After you graduate, you spend a year working in different hospitals and clinics to get experience. Then you come work for the foundation full-time. And Luis? Luis finishes his college program and gets trained as a diabetes educator. He could work with the foundation too, helping other young people learn to manage their condition. Maria felt like she was dreaming. 3 weeks ago, she was worried about paying Luis's medical bills. Now someone was offering her a chance to help thousands of people while following her dreams of becoming a nurse. Mr. Blackstone, can I ask you something? Of course. Why me? You're a billionaire. You could find someone with more experience, more education, someone who knows how to run big programs. Richard stood up from the bench and looked down at her kindly. Because experience and education can be taught, but character can't be. I need someone who will see the foundation as a way to help people, not as a way to become important or powerful. I need someone who will remember that behind every statistic is a real person with a real family. He gestured toward the diner. I need someone who will always remember what it feels like to work for every dollar and worry about next month's bills. Someone who will understand exactly why this foundation matters. Maria closed the folder and looked up at him. What if I mess it up? What if I'm not smart enough or good enough? Maria, You made a life-or-death decision in under 30 seconds and saved a child's life. You're smart enough for anything. And as for being good enough, Richard paused. You're the kind of good that can't be taught or bought. You're the kind of good that changes the world one person at a time. Maria stood up and held out her hand. Mr. Blackstone, I would be honored to run the Santos Emergency Response Foundation. Richard shook her hand, and Maria could see tears in his eyes. No, Maria. The honor is all mine. As they walked back toward the diner, Richard told her about the plans already in motion. Training centers were being designed, partnerships with hospitals were being established, and scholarship programs were being set up at nursing schools across the country. In 5 years, Richard said, we'll have trained over 10,000 people in basic emergency response. We'll have funded healthcare education for hundreds of students. And it all started because one waitress cared enough to save a stranger's child. Maria thought about Tommy Chen and wondered how he was doing. She thought about all the other children who might need help someday, and all the people who could learn to provide that help if they just had the training and opportunity. Mr. Blackstone? Yes? Thank you for reminding me that dreams can come true. I had almost forgotten. Richard smiled as he got into his expensive car. No, Maria. Thank you for reminding me what dreams are worth having. As she watched him drive away, Maria realized that her life had just changed completely. Tomorrow, she would start nursing school. In a few years, she would be running a foundation that could save thousands of lives. But tonight, she was still a waitress at Danny's diner, and she had tables to clear. She walked back inside with a smile on her face, knowing that sometimes the most ordinary moments can lead to the most extraordinary changes.